Hi everyone, I'm Haley Szynski. For the assignment, I've chosen to focus on romance. And for the final, I chose to write about the endings of all my books and how the authors tied the endings together or either left the books with unanswered questions. And for the first book, I decided to write about Eleanor and Park, which is a novel written by the author Rainbow Rowell. It is in the third-person stance, and the way Rowell wrote it, switches back between Eleanor and Park and gives us both of their perspectives in the story. Every book I've written about was a young adult book. And Eleanor and Park begins when Eleanor moves back in with her family in Nebraska, and she meets Park at school on the bus, and the two of them are misfits, outcasts. They don't really fit in, and they end up becoming involved with each other and blossoming a romance. And throughout the book, we find out lots about their lives and how they kind of gravitated toward each other to see comfort in one another. In the end of the book, Eleanor moves away because of trouble at home, and Park actually writes her letters. However, she never responds to him until a year later, and she writes him a letter with only 3 words. And Rowell does not include what those three words were in the book. She leaves it up to interpretation. So the book just kind of ends like, did she tell him she loves him, or does she say something else? You don't really know. It's kind of a cliffhanger, but she does leave you wanting more from the story. For my next book, I decided to write about Twilight, which is the first book in the Twilight saga. It's by the author Stephenie Meyer. This book is written in the first person and also past tense. Twilight begins when high schooler Bella Swan moves from Arizona to Forks, Washington to reconnect with her father, and she goes to live with him. And while she's at school, she meets a young boy named Edward Cullen, and they end up spending some time together, and they like each other. He ends up saving her in a few incidences, and she ends up finding out that he's a vampire. This takes a modern spin on romance, and it's kind of crazy to see how she's willing to risk her life to be with a vampire, someone who's undead, who doesn't have a beating heart. And in the end of the book, we see both of them go to prom together, and she asks him, Edward, will you turn me to a vampire? And he says, no, my love is enough for you. You don't need to be a vampire. He's strongly against being a vampire. He had no choice when he became one. But the way Stephenie Meyer ends the book, she says that he places his lips on her neck, and that's how it ends. And so it's really up to interpretation. Obviously, we know there's more books in the series, so she does write more continuing off of that, but it is sort of a cliffhanger. For my next book, I wrote about The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks, which is also another romantic book. Nicholas Sparks is famous for books like A Walk to Remember, Dear John, The Best of Me. A lot of his books have become movies. The Notebook is about an old man named Noah Calhoun who is living in a nursing home. And we find out that he, every day, reads to an elderly woman, and we don't know her name. And he reads to her, and he keeps saying he hopes for a miracle to happen. Later on, the book flashes back to 1946 and then 1932, where we find out about these two young lovers and how their relationship was blossoming. However, they get separated and they end up finding each other again. And then later in the book, towards the end, we find out that the old woman he reads to every day is actually Allie, his wife, and she has Alzheimer's, and that's why she doesn't remember anything. So that's why he reads to her every day, trying to rekindle her memories, rekindle their love. And in the end of the book, Nicholas Sparks leaves it off with Noah and his last few days of his life. He chooses to go lay with Allie in her room, knowing the risks, knowing that she might not remember him. However, she does not freak out around him. She says, "I missed you," and the two of them lay together in the bed. Now, we don't know anything else that happens. Sparks kind of left it off on a cliffhanger, but we do want more of this heart-wrenching drama, and the reader definitely is affected and feels the love for them. The next book I decided to write about is The Apothecary. The Apothecary is also the first in a series called The Apothecary Series. It is a book written by Mal Malloy, who writes fiction books. And The Apothecary is about a young girl and her family. They're living in America, and this is setting the Cold War around 1952, and the government is actually blackmailing them. They're on a blacklist, so they get forced to move to England. The family flees, and while she flees to England, she meets a boy her age named Benjamin B. And Benjamin, his father, owns a pharmaceutical shop for medicine called an apothecary. And he ends up getting kidnapped by Russians, and during the book, Janie and Benjamin look for the father. They end up finding out that the apothecary is holding much more than just being a medicine shop. And it's a really adventurous book. And during the end of it, Janie and Benjamin are kind of separated because Benjamin's father is an alchemist, and he makes a elixir for Janie and another character who is with her for most of the book. And the elixir makes them forget everything that had happened in order to protect their memories, protect them from the government, from the Russians. And because of this, she forgets Benjamin. And then in the end of the book, flashback a year later, Benjamin writes Janie a letter trying to get her to remember him. And we don't actually know if she does remember him. She kind of, Malloy kind of hints that Janie remembers Benjamin, but it still leaves off on a cliffhanger. We know there's more to the series, but according to The Apothecary, that's how it ends. It's just off on another note, like all the other romance books I've read. The next book I wrote about is Stardust by Neil Gaiman, who is an English author living in the UK. Stardust is a third person, written in the third person stance. Neil Gaiman is also very famous for books like Coraline, The Sandman. He writes fantasy, science fiction books. I did not know that about him until I researched it. So Stardust is a book that begins in the Victorian era, where we meet a fairy, and her name is Una. And Una ends up running into a man named Dunstan, and they have a romance going on. And a couple months later, Dunstan receives a baby on his doorstep, who is later known as Tristan. Now, Una and Dunstan were not able to be together because she is enslaved by a witch. And later on in the book, Tristan grows up, and he stumbles upon a fallen star. And at the time, he is very head over heels for this girl named Victoria, and he asks for her hand in marriage, and he said he's willing to do whatever it takes. So he goes back to get the falling star and obtain it. And while this is going on, we find out in the book that there is a lord with 3 sons, and he is dying, and he's looking for the next heir to his throne. He throws a pendant out of his castle window, and he says whoever can get the pendant is the next heir. While doing so, he knocks a falling star out of the sky, which is the same star that Tristan sees. When Tristan goes back for the star, he sees a young woman. Her name is Yvain. The two of them end up falling in love, going through an adventurous story. Later, in the end of the book, we find out Una is released from the evil witch, and that Una is actually the only daughter of the Lord, and she's intended to rule Stormhold, but she passes it over to her son Tristan, and he ends up ruling Stormhold. And in the very end of the book, Tristan dies. He rules until he dies, and Yvain takes over, and she is immortal. So she takes over, but a part of her actually died when Tristan died. So I would say that Stardust had a very happy ending. Neil Gaiman kind of tied everything together. There wasn't any questions left unanswered, although it is a sad ending. There was so much adventure that happened in the book that it makes up for it. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. That is all. Thank you. Bye.